Great, thank you. Like I had expected to do, I mean, I think we should just dive straight into the conversation because um, this is a lovely, crisp afternoon, and I think I'm kind of interested in the position that I find myself vis-a-vis the two books that we are trying to have a conversation around, which is actually trying to address the bind that these two books present, because one of which is a fiction and the other is a non-fiction. So, so therefore, what might be interesting, and I'll come to you, Niladri, first, is probably to explore the question of how fictional is this genre of fiction that you have put in the labor to translate and present, and with a very elaborate, detailed introduction, right? Because I ask this from the point of view that the author, Krishna Gopal Mollik, is someone who's also using the author surrogate in the book, right? Yeah. And that's really what, for me, has actually triggered this thought as to how, where are the limits drawn, etc. So I'll start with you, and then I'll come to you, Santa, on the other aspect of this very bind. Yeah.
It's remarkable how much we actually have in common. Krishna Gopal Mollik is a very, very annoying writer. Let me just sort of put that on the table. Incredibly annoying, infuriating writer, because of the very simple reason that he will refuse to be classed, and you cannot categorize him. And this is something that I think he very deliberately plays with, in the sense that, you know, he is going to constantly say that I'm writing fiction, but in every novel there is going to be a character called Krishna Gopal Mollik. And you think, what the hell is going on? Surely this is autobiography. But then he's going to say, no, this is not autobiography, this is fiction. And every single detail, you know, and he actually says that in so many words, that every single detail of my novels is from real life. So he's constantly playing with the audience's expectations. So why is he bothering to call it fiction at all? Why can't he just call it autobiography? My answer would be, surely I think some of the dialogue is invented. Surely some of the dialogue is made up. And I'm pretty certain that autobiography also expects a certain rigorous adherence to truth, which I think may not perhaps have interested Krishna Gopal Mollik so much. But I think he's constantly at pains to impress upon us that nothing is made up, everything is true, it's all true. And I think that is what I find so infuriating, is that everything about it looks like autobiography, but he will not call it that.
Thank you. I mean, I think you've sort of supplied us with this beautiful phrase, the rigorous adherence to truth, which is what brings me to Santa. And I'm sort of really, therefore, wanting to explore with you, Santa, because this is your autobiography. Yet, I've also known you as essentially a poet and an activist. So, I mean, I'm not saying that these are mutually exclusive to each other. However, if I were to sort of extend the same question to you, how non-fictional is this non-fiction? Because, and I'm sort of interested in the sort of leaps that you can take, and you have taken in your book, which do not necessarily seem to be tied down to the everyday, to the most mundane everydayness. Yet it's all about our lived realities, right? So I'm just trying to understand, how have you navigated this bind?
First of all, like writing is a kind of is a kind of my passion. And then my ways of writing a format is completely different. It's very raw. And then sometimes my interest is more on poem. Because, you know, like writing poems, it allows me to express some of my deepest from my core through very highly literature values. And when writing memoirs, like it's all fact, and sometimes there is this limitation. And then you cannot put any of these things, evidences, and that's which is not really happening in my lifetime. So there is these challenges. Writing poems is something which allows me to express a lot of feeling that happens, that's taking place inside me. And then memoirs, there is this limitation because you have to recollect all the memories and the dates and everything. There's somehow, it's very difficult for me. But poem is something, if you see a things, then you can map that things or stuff or the moment or the environment in the way you wanted to take it. So that kind of privilege is there when writing a fiction or poems. Poems I consider as fiction because, you know, it's something that conveys what is feelings inside you through a literature expression. So, yeah.
Well, yes, it is fiction and yet not fiction. I mean, and pretty much, I mean, I'm quite interested in how these categories constantly are, like in Krishna Gopal Mollik's case, are constantly getting blurred. And I'm sort of interested, therefore, in the connection that one draws to, say, queer literature or the canon of queer literature, if there at all be some canon or an emerging canon of queer literature. What about this porousness? What about these porousness of categories? Because it really mimics the porousness of categories that queer individuals and trans individuals have forever been talking about. It is talking about, you know, the ways these imprints sort of get transferred onto each other, right? It's like something that's been suppressed for a very long time. It's like, and like a rose kept inside the book, and the rose has dried, but you can see the imprint of the rose on on the page between which it was being. So I'm kind of interested in if you would like to take that aspect of the categorization and the porousness on.
Yes, no, I think that's a very, very valid point. And interestingly enough, that is exactly what I was thinking about. And also, this is something that I think about when I'm teaching literature as such in the classroom, because I'm an academic, so I teach classes as well. And you know, I very often pose this question to the students, and I ask them, you know, what is it about fiction that makes it fiction? What is it about the novel that makes it a novel? What is it about a poem that makes it a poem? And they try to define it as best they can. But every time they try to define it in a certain way, I'm also going to give an example as to, you know, yeah, but then this isn't it. So therefore, every time you try to define either a poem or a novel or a play, there is going to be an example of some published writing that has gone against it. So therefore, I think these categories are there for a purpose, but I think it is the whole point of the writer to constantly sort of push back against those categories. And I absolutely believe that Krishna Gopal Mollik himself is trying to do that. He's trying to ask us certain very vital questions about, well, actually, basically about truth. What is truth? How do you define truth? Does truth exist? And what is interesting is that Krishna Gopal Mollik, you know, he wasn't an academic. He wasn't, you know, trained in deconstruction or post-structuralism. He was a journalist and a statesman. But unconsciously, I think he is asking those very vital questions as to what does it mean to speak the truth? Whose truth? How does the truth then get twisted or changed in its telling? And you know, there is somebody that I don't know whether I mentioned him or not in the introduction, but when I was thinking about Krishna Gopal Mollik, I was also thinking about another queer writer called Truman Capote. And I was thinking about Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. Ostensibly, it is about a murder that happens in the US, but the style of writing is entirely fictional. So for the purpose of that book, some people have used the word faction, fact and fiction. So now are we going to call it faction? But I think that, and your question about how that maps onto our understanding of identities, absolutely. Because, you know, I challenge anybody in the audience to to tell me that they're a perfect man, or they're a perfect woman, or they're a perfect gay, or a perfect lesbian. You know, these are stereotypes that simply exist only in fiction. Nobody's 100% anything. And I think that is something which Krishna Gopal Maulik is also trying to do. You know, he's a domestic man, you know, he's married, he has a child. He writes a novel called Amar Premikara, which translates as My Girlfriends. And the very first line of that novel, called Amar Premikara, My Girlfriends, is, I'm 112.5% homosexual. Go figure.
Well, I mean, I think many of us in our personal lives perhaps can sort of, you know, we know of people, we know of several people, and these are not necessarily in binaries and they don't sit in opposition, right? But Niladri, what I'm really interested is in this whole, in the question of truth, as you sort of brought up. And so my question is a little structural in how you have decided to name the book, Entering the Maze, Queer Fiction of Krishna Gopal Maulik, where in your introduction, you very emphatically write that it's important to note that Maulik consistently uses the 19th century English term homosexual instead of the 20th century term gay or the more recent 21st century term queer. What was your reason to call Entering the Maze a queer fiction of Krishna Gopal Maulik and not specifically keep the word homosexual as is being used by Krishna Gopal?
Oh, I was really, really hoping you would ask me that question. Because, well, obviously, the first is a historical reason. Is because homosexual is a term, like I said in the introduction, that belongs in the 19th century. And there is a certain kind of pathologization of sexuality that is embedded in that term, which I definitely do not agree with. Which is why I said that Krishna Gopal Maulik might be situating himself as homosexual, but then the classic definition of homosexual is somebody who is not at all, you know, interested in women, and here is somebody who's gotten married and has a child and everything. So therefore, you know, Krishna Gopal Maulik claims the word homosexual for himself, but his lived life is not that of a conventional homosexual at all. So I felt that he is absolutely at liberty to call himself a homosexual. I am going to instead use the word queer. And also I'm not calling him queer, I'm just calling his fiction queer. So therefore in his life he could be homosexual, but the fiction that he's producing, that I think is queer, because I think that Krishna Gopal Maulik is challenging a lot of normativities. And I think the one major normativity that he challenges is the normativity of what I called chrononormativity, which basically means that you are supposed to behave in a certain way when you're of a certain age. And this particularly applies to sexuality. So our conventional normative understanding of sexuality is that you are going to start being sexual when you are 19 and you're going to stop being sexual when you're 39. So you're going to be sexual for 20 years of your life. You're not allowed to be sexual before, you're definitely not allowed to be sexual after. If you're sexual before, your mommy and daddy is going to take you to the psychiatrist. If you're sexual after, you're either a dirty old man, budha sathiya gaya, budor bhimruti hoyeche. I mean, the vocabulary is already in place. So therefore, that is what Krishna Gopal is pushing back against.
It's interesting how you bring it out, I mean, in your translation where Krishna Gopal speaks of himself to be in his 59th year, and describes it to be the golden age of homosexuality, which was quite fascinating to read, because given that how queer spaces too have their own inherent ageism, where older queer folks, and this is something that Akhil, with who you've published, Santa, the book of poems, where your poem has been published, where Akhil sort of asked this question, Akhil Katyal, poet Akhil Katyal, asked this question as to, we see so many vibrant queer youth, but where do queer and trans persons after their 40s, where do they disappear? Where do we find them? We do not find them taking center stage as much as as we see in their 20s and in their 30s. I see that. That's a question I sort of ask myself even as we walk the Pride, which is down this road, which happened just a couple of months ago. Santa, I've also, like in Niladri's book, I've also marked passages, several passages. But there are a couple of things that I really want you to talk about. There is this whole episode of the blue jeans, right? Which you kind of keep coming back to, and how, sort of, what led you to writing? What led you to take up writing? Can you sort of talk a little bit about that? I mean, of course, people would go into the book and be able to read that more.
Yeah, like writing is something that helps me to take out all the positive vibes that was taken inside me, because there was a time when I grew up, I did not find people to listen to my stories, and I had got a very limited safe space where I would be telling to people about the challenges and about my feelings and about relationship in particular. So that really makes me suffocated. So in order to release those energy, writing down helps me to kind of telling stories in that format. And about, there were also things that really inspired me, like blue zines, photo romance. That was the time that it was very popular in Manipur, because, Manipur culture, because for me, I consider blue zines and Hollywood movies and also the photo romance, that kind of medium also helps in the queer globalization. Because, that was the time that really inspired me to love a person who I wanted to spend the rest of my life. Going through all those narratives, that comic formats, I feel like when I went through those, magazines, I feel like I'm a part of it. Like, for example, when I watch Pretty Woman, I really adored the boldness of, the heroine, Julia Roberts, and I feel like there should be a man in the world that will take my hands and, willing to spend the rest of my life along with him, like Richard Gere. So that was the whole story, and I feel like that strongly inspire a lot of those stories, because that boldness is there in the Bollywood and the Bollywood magazine, the Hollywood magazine, but in 80s and 90s, most of the stories that comes out from Indian culture is very much conventional. It's all about a man and women living together, having children. That's the end of a love story. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most fascinating sort of, and because I know this because you've told this to me in person in Imphal, sitting in Imphal. But I mean, your description of the first Lai Harauba performance, where you go and you witness and the absolute hilariousness with which things happen, and also the sort of shock and the violence that you experience. Do you want to sort of talk a little bit about how that seemed to be such an? I mean, it's in the book you write about it so evocatively. So I'm kind of interested to know whether that has had some significance in the way, not just you, but the way you see the Nupi Manbi community, which loosely translates as being trans women in Meitei. How does that sort of correlate?
It's very much related, because, if Nupa Maiba, Nupa Amaibi, the male shaman doesn't exist, then people would have questioned my existence today. Because they take a very crucial role in this flourishment of the gender plurality and multiplicity that exists in Manipuri society. And recently, when I did this research, Faida, Gender at Periphery, it also tells a lot about the gender plurality that was once existed in the actual Manipuri society before the colonization of British, before India annexed Manipur. So the whole narrative is there, but the question about me and what keeps me in dilemma constantly is how those diversity that was once existent in Manipur society has lost. How it got erased from this the chapter of Manipur history. So that's a very big question. And also we have a Nupi Shabi, Sumang Lila Nupi Shabi is a courtyard play where all the actors are from male take part of female roles. And also, you know, like, because of this people's existence and visibility in the Manipur society, my existence has not been getting a critical question. So that's one thing which I think it's very important to recognize their existence. But unfortunately, what happens is, like, because of this many factors, it could be globalization, it could be gender ideology, it could be because of this gender awareness that has been ramping across the globe, people have come up kind of certain ideas which is very conventional. Men and women is still there, very, very heterosexual. But when you look back, when I look back in 70s and 80s, people are very, very progressive in terms of dressing, in terms of meeting people. Now we are in conflict. People are very much into this narrow divisive politics. So for me, like, if somebody asks me to...
And would you say that divisiveness sort of cuts across, like even within, I mean, say even within the trans space? Do you see that divisiveness sort of seep in? Do you see that happening, or is it just?
Yeah, very much. That really makes me disappointed, because when this communist strike broke out in May 3rd, then, you know, there were cookie peoples, because Imphal is a comfort hub for the transgender community, both for hills and valley. Because, you know, like, in the tribal community, it's very, very strict, and people are not able to come out from the closet. And it's the only Imphal city that provide them certain level of leverage and liberty to express themselves. And they are working and living along with Meitei transgender women. Nupi Manvi runs beauty parlor. And because of this conflict, everything has started dividing. And on the second of this conflict, I personally had helped a transgender person belonging to Cookie through this Imphal police, and help her and drop her to her hometown.
Right.
So
no, you do talk about that. You do talk about towards the end of the book, and I mean, of course, which is, I was kind of interested, I mean, how recently did this book get written? And because, I mean, it just talks about incidents that happened barely 7 or 8 months ago. So, you know, like, it just seems so relevant. But I'll come back to you again, but let me go to Niladri, because there's this one kind of, this is the first, this is this work called Bondhur Pantha, about which you can tell us a little more, where he talks about this one incident. Krishna Gopal Mollik talks about this one incident of a Nochiketa concert, and then he is at College Square, wearing the lungi and a potua, and it's kind of, it sort of is also a stamp. I mean, the kind of clothing that's described is also kind of reminiscent of a certain era. We in early days of cruising, as it existed in the public space, we did come across people who would not just come in their Sunday best, but also in their regular, ordinary clothing, right? I mean, and that sort of was kind of interesting for me, for him to have kind of marked it. And sort of that whole episode of following this boy, or not just following this boy, actually being pulled by this boy to show the road to Shelda station, etc. And there is this one space where the boy pulls him, and he pulled me by the hand. I have heard of diseases, the germ of which never leaves your body once in. Yes. So this whole balance with you know, desire and disease, which is kind of brought out pretty centrally in what you have translated in Krishna Gopal's fiction, sort of reminds me of Ove Guber and this particular book, To the Friend Who Did Not Save My Life, and where this particular passage, which is this discourse between pleasure and danger. So can you tell us a little bit about what you felt while translating regarding this particular dance, you know, between death and desire, and this whole anxiety around disease and contamination?
Yes, I mean, that is actually a very rare part of that book, because if you go through the entire book, there's hardly anything that is so dark. And it is only dark for a split second. So it just gets dark for a second, and then immediately he gets back to this sort of fun tone that he has. But again, the fact that it is acknowledged, I think it is important. So I think we are looking at a writer who is aware that there is a dark sort of underbelly to his identity. But then he just barely acknowledges it. And I think the fact that he does not dwell on it is also his politics, isn't it? Because, you know, it is very easy. And this is something that I tell everybody, is that there is a certain heteronormative expectation from queer narratives that they have to be sad. You know, if you are a good queer, then come on, please be miserable. Please have an unhappy life. Please have a terrible death. Because then if we get unhappy narratives of queer people, then we can then sort of sit back and think, oh, well, thank God I'm not one of them. I have a lovely husband. I have 3 wonderful children. Thank God I'm not as miserable as them. So therefore, there is a way in which, you know, unhappy queer narratives are demanded by heteronormativity. And here you have this man who is in his late 50s, and he says, oh, guess what? I'm gay, and I think it's bloody fun. And I think it is that sort of defiance which I think is what I got from Krishna Gopal Mollik. The fact that, you know, he is creating a counter-narrative to the way in which, you know, homosexuality for a very long time. And remember that in Bondhur Pantha, he also talks about the fact that he's completely aware of AIDS. He says, please don't do that, you people, don't be aware of what you're going, you know, AIDS can kill you. So he's aware of AIDS. So he's aware of AIDS. He's aware of the whole 19th century Victorian pathologization of homosexuality as an illness. He's aware of all of that. In spite of that awareness, he says, well, guess what? I am not going to feed into that narrative. I am going to shape a narrative that is going to be full of joy and fun and sexiness.
So when Krishna Gopal writes in Bangla, what is the Bangla shabd that he uses? Does he use homosexual in English?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
That's Bangla.
No, he absolutely, that is something that I mentioned, is that he absolutely definitely uses the English term and he writes it in Bangla. So
he writes it in Bangla.
Oh yes, so it is absolutely hoyokar, moyokar. So, but he will not use the word somokami, and he definitely is not going to use the word somopremi, because the other point that I would want to make about his narrative is that, you know, it's not so much about love, it's more about pleasure. And I think that is a very important point for us to remember, is that, you know, towards the end of Buho Probesh, of course, these 2 boys fall in love. But if you look at either Senior Citizen, which is the other short story, and Bondhur Pantha, and to a very large extent towards the early part of Buho Probesh, it's about pleasure. Love does not come into it. And I think I regard that as being slightly anti-patriarchal as well, because patriarchy somehow tries to contain sexuality by sentimentalizing it. And that is something which he resists.
Yeah, because I think I know of a definite friend who spoke exactly about this, around this whole articulation of queerness and desire, is that, I mean, especially the death of desire, because I think what love and this whole aspect of, you know, that we find in queer spaces about love is love, etc. And I personally find it quite banal, you know. I mean, love is love, so is bacon, and a flower is a flower. So, I mean, so what? I mean, because we kind of cease to qualify that, and we do not look into, and we don't want to get it dirty, right? Everything's been sanitized, everything's been sort of cleansed, it's been made to be palatable, sort of packaged. So yeah, I mean, and what happens to plain the question of lust? I mean, and I see in Krishna Gopal's work, I mean, it's almost dripping with lust, and it's so delicious. It's so important to sort of mark lust as much as one is dying to sort of mark love, and dying in the process, and dying multiple ways. But it's interesting, therefore, to come to you, Santa, when I've been reading The Yellow Sparrow, I've been sort of, because I've been with you in those on those streets, walked with you, and I've seen what that stadium means, what it really means to sort of occupy a space which is also marked by heavy security, bandobast, etc. Because you do talk about it, and I want you to talk about two specific things, if that's all right with you. One is your encounter with the moral police, the Naharols, which keeps repeating itself. It just keeps coming back, and you've had several incidents. And the other was, I was kind of interested, which you just brought up about the Western films, and buying dresses from the Alu Goli. You know, those two kind of sit quite interestingly and almost playfully with each other, because you're constantly also pushing, and you're also engaging in, there is direct confrontation with the moral police. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Of course, you talk a lot about that in the book, but...
Yeah, moral policing, I feel like it's a part of my life, because every time I am the person who is taking risks of my life, because I don't want to be someone. I just wanted to be free from all sort of oppression, and that makes me so vulnerable. And then I consistently getting backlashes from moral policing gadget, and also from these, militant groups, because, like, I'm very open. I have been very much vocal about the community. It's not about the community, but actually people actually doesn't want a person like me to talk about Manipur politics. Their view towards transgender person is like, you are a transgender person, so you should be confined in beauty parlors, or you should be confined in Shumanglila, and you should become a Nupa, maybe, the transgender shaman. So that is this stereotype, but person like me come forward and then talking about several issues that's happening in Manipur, something that really hurts them. So that makes me so vulnerable. And the thing is, like, the challenges that I faced during that course of time in many of the instances was I was left alone to deal with the situation, even within the community. And even I wanted to get justice against those oppression and violence, then there was no one to really stand up to help me, to support me. There is no legal support that I would probably get from those legal fraternity, a legal institution, because that's an attack coming from an illegal institution. And the other thing about Alugal is, because that particular place, that particular shop is a place where you have this outlet, all the dresses in a very, very cheapest way, but you will find all sort of designs there. So I'm very fond of buying things and then cutting it into different shape in the way I wanted to wear and in the way I wanted to bring it out. So that's the thing. And then also that was the time that it's very much happening parallelly during that time, those Alugali thing, and then the deployed of Indian Army in the Imphal city. That was sort of things, but apart from all those challenges and then the darker places of that place, my most happiest moment of those era is the night time. The night time was completely occupied. The Imphal city was occupied by the community. So that was the beauty of community mobilization. That was the beauty of community culture. So that I have learned from those eras.
No, and I've seen that personally to vouch for what you're saying, because, and it's a very interesting way that the spectrum of gender non-conforming people, from both the Nupi Manbi and the Nupi Manbas, translating as the trans feminine, and those from the trans masculine spectrum, to sort of have this very organic lived life in the markets and in the bastis in Manipur, which really sort of makes me want to evoke this question of home, which you bring up so beautifully towards the end of your book. And I wanted you to perhaps read that part, and which is on page 292. And of course, it's really marked in my book. If you want to read it from here, if you want to talk about it, if you want to talk about, if you want to, but that's a very beautifully written passage, Santa. So I was hoping you'd be able to read.
So, yeah, I wrote this when I was in Bangkok because I fled to Bangkok just to save my life from this conflict because I was attacked, and then police came to my house to arrest me because I called our social welfare department for the mismanagement of rupees 10 lakh that's supposed to be put down in the transgender welfares. So the whole ideas of Manipur, when I see Manipur not only for Meitei community, even though I belong to Meitei, Manipur is a home to many, many ethnic community. And we can't claim Manipur only for Meiteis. That's politically incorrect. I am a person who am very interested in going through the history, and I also have a certain knowledge about Manipur, and I wanted to see Manipur like before it was like 5 years, 4 years, where people were very much together, especially within the community, Naga, Kuki, Jao, all this community, because being a leader, I have this very close emotional connection with all my community. But today, they have this fear to reach out to me, and I'm still wondering how they are living in their hometown now. It's terrible. And
Those
this
incidents in Churachandpur and
yeah, Churachandpur. I work in Churachandpur, Senapati, Okrus, across Manipur. But I've lost that privilege now because of this larger political conflict. I wrote in this way, the idea of home has been completely destroyed by the ongoing communal strife. The very idea of peace is poisoned, corrupted, and polluted by the tensions of the people. And people in power are throwing tantrums against both the community under the gauze of restoring peace. Hence, the victim and the innocent lives, civilians of Manipur are left to deal with the situation alone. Maybe people have different ways of understanding home, peace, and conflict. However, being a Nupi Manbi activist, my perspective towards the values comes from the lifelong experiences, collective efforts, understanding, trust, and belongingness. In our transgender society and culture, these are the capitals that we have invested through solidarity, support, and networking.
The use of the word capital here was so moving for me. I mean, the way you kind of describe it, especially when you're describing the idea of home and the land that multiple and diverse communities have inhabited for time immemorial. Yeah, I mean, there are several other passages which I've marked, but I'm not going to give that away. To you, Niladri, I was hoping that you'd also read out to us a passage that you said that you'd like to. Also, can you sort of time Krishna Gopal Maulik? He seems to sort of exist in this very nebulous idea of time, which is quite fascinating. It doesn't have to be.
No. So
could be Tulsi Chakraborty in Porosh Pathor, you know, someone like that. You know, I mean, for me, it could be somebody like that navigating the park, thinking of, and probably that's how he described Porosh Pathor.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of a philosophical.
Yeah, no, he died in
Queerness.
1993. He was born in 1936, so that is.
When did Bondhur Pantha get written?
So 2003 is when he died, but Bondhur Pantha, it came out sometime in the early 1990s. So it's all happening in the early 1990s.
So it's in the era where HIV and AIDS has already entered the discussion.
Yeah. And which is why it makes into the narrative as well. So this is where the boy in Buho Probesh, which I translate as entering the maze, this is where the boy meets, this is where boy meets boy. And this is the way it works. Just when my heart is pining for a loving, encouraging, and admiring friend, Manoj has appeared from nowhere, or rather, I have discovered him. While Manoj is the very living embodiment of beauty, I had asked him later, do you know the meaning of Manoj? I know. Desire. Tell me more. What else? Modon? Modon reminds people of a dirty word. You know that, don't you? What's the formal name of Modon? Formal name. Kamdev Kondorpo. Yes, the adjective kondorpokanti, beauteous as Eros, is probably meant to describe the looks of Manoj. As tall as me, no flab, but no muscles either, yet well built. He is fair, but not anemic like white people. Instead, his is the fairness of an aristocratic Muslim. A face crowned by silky hair, which is beyond my powers to describe. His glance matches his long eyelashes. His size of sandals was bigger than mine, and his big toe was large, and there was a golden fuzz all over his legs. His body of perfect youth had but one flaw. The mounds of his chest were bigger than mine. One day on this subject, he lifted his shirt. See how ugly it is, especially the right one. Feel it. Won't you be embarrassed? What's embarrassment in front of you? I felt his chest, and it was bigger than a patella, but full and firm. I pressed it lightly and asked, "Does it hurt you or feel good?" "Whatever you do to me feels good," he said, pinching my tummy really hard and going away.
I think we're sort of
can
going to
have
wrap it up right
questions from
now,
the
and so maybe you can open the floor for questions, comments, to keep it brief, and if it's directed towards either Santa or to Niladri, if you can be specific, if there are questions that are.
There's one friend.
Hi, my name is Chintan. It is quite rare for literature festivals in India to invite trans people as speakers and panelists. I'm glad that this festival is doing that. Why do you think this isn't happening? There are so many books written by trans people, so many books are getting translated, there's so many activists. Why do you think even so-called liberal spaces are not having as much transgender representation as they should be?
Getting a translator who is transgender affirmative could be also a big challenge to bring out the stories in the form of a book. Second thing is the publisher. It's very difficult to find good publishing house that's willing to publish transgender writings. And the third one is like there is a lot of politics that's taking place within inter and intra community. So people who get invitation, these are the people who get certain level of privilege. And there are a lot of good writers, trans writers who I have known for years, and they have not got opportunity because of this politics and the hierarchy and also the networking the person has. And the other thing, what I observed in this scenario is if currently what's happening is like if you wanted to get into a space like this, not this space particularly, but in many spaces, then you should have a very close affiliation with the ruling government, and you have to be a very much Hindutva type. Because the narratives around trans, queer is completely changed in the last few decades. People have started claiming their identity and relate with other gods like Sikhandi. And this is true, the mythology is true, but actually for me, you can't relate somebody's stories or gender and sexualities with God. For me, God can do everything. God is omnipresent, and we are human. And once you're considered as a God, demigod, then that is the biggest disadvantage in human rights movement for me. People won't consider you as a human. People would consider you as a God. That it has taken away a lot of values that is associated with your personhood. Absolutely. This I experience.
Fabulous, fabulous, Santa. Thank you for sort of really stating it as it should be.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, there is time for just one thing here. I was quite interested in how the book cover reads, which is the yellow sparrow Memoir of a Transgender Woman. Did you want this line, Memoir of a Transgender Woman, to be sort of added to the main title of your autobiography? It's something that I was quite intrigued, even with Krishna Gopal. Yeah, because I mean, I'm kind of interested in how queerness then panders to the question of market and marketing of queer literature, and how are we navigating that? What becomes sellable? What is really the flavor of the season, and therefore sexy? So, and therefore, I mean, how do you sort of keep it in airports, etc., where people can sort of pick it up?
I
as
am
a quick
always
read.
looking for my book at the airport. It's still not there.
Yeah, sorry.
I buy plane tickets so that I can find it at the airport, but it's still not there.
Okay, just a comment on Santa's, what you said about religion. And I just wanted to remind you that Aryavan in the Mahabharata, that is a character, a transgender, who is worshipped, in fact, by transgenders, all skewed. But to go back to the gentleman before me, who commented on this, I have seen at this festival over the years a lot of inclusion of LGBTQ, etc., etc. And I wanted to ask maybe Niladri on that, what are the changes you have seen? There has to have been changes over the last decade, let's say. Do you find that people are more accepting, they're more open, that there are more opportunities for everybody to be on the same platform as equals?
Yeah. People have started, even the Sahitya Academy, they have started inviting trans writers. But the question is like whether it's really inclusive or it's a kind of a token representation.
Like you're ticking a box. Just to
Yeah,
say that.
because a trans writer will be having a different conclave. My thing is like when I approach publisher also, don't consider me as a transgender. Consider me as a writer. As a writer, don't market me in the way you want it to. Because we are always projected as pitiful and helpless people. No, Santa Khurai is not a pitiful and helpless person. I am a good storyteller, and if the market wanted me, take me. If don't want, then keep the story aside. So this is happening. Inclusiveness, diversity, inclusive equity, this is something which is trying to cover up the ugliest part of the human inclusive project in a way that it covers up the realities.
It's DEI has become really the corporate buzzword, and it's really something that you get marked on, and therefore it's compliant. It's almost like compliance. It's like a compliance issue. Therefore, you do it. It's not because that you do it because it's a matter of right, but you do it because it makes more business sense.
Almost
and
like
I think
CSR.
therefore what Santa said is like it really reduces to some kind of a tokenism. I was here as a moderator in the last literary fest, and there was Akai Padmashali, who was someone I was speaking to in that session. Yes, there are how many of queer trans writing is getting published? Do we have enough interested publishers? Are people getting... I've known of these literary fests where trans writers have been asked to come, and then they're kept segregated, where they're not asked to be part of the general programs, and where, so they are just there because again, the organizers have ticked a major box, but they're not really included in spaces. So yes, there's always a pushback for inclusion. Yeah. So, did you want to reflect on that?
Time is up, so we have to go.
Okay, time's up. But if there were any other reflections or conversations that people wanted to flag? Yeah.
No, this is just to say that my book is on sale. So I'm here. So if there are people who are willing to purchase copies of it, I'll be happy to sign them. So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.